From the First Presbyterian Church of Atlanta, this is TheoEd Talks. I'm Ryan Bonfilio, and I'm here with Paul Wallace, a lecturer in physics and astronomy at Agnes Scott College. Paul, it's so good to have you with us today.
Thank you, Ryan. Happy to be here.
In your TheoEd Talks, Paul, you, which is called There's Something Holy Out There, you bring us into this fascinating conversation about faith and science. And so I'm curious, just how did you become interested in this topic of faith and science to begin with?
Well, when I was very young, it started young, as these things often do. My dad was a not a physics professor. He was a civil engineering professor at Georgia Tech. And so we had all these science books laying around the house. And one of them in particular was this book on natural history. And I was fascinated with it. I mean, I got into dinosaurs like all kids do maybe, but I went further with it and got completely fascinated with natural history in general. But Dad also took us to church every Sunday, and there was a book there too with a different timeline about the way things happened in the past. 6 days of creation in the Bible versus billions of years in this timeline of evolution in the natural history book. So that's which one is it, and how does this work together? It started off very early like that.
Yeah.
So I guess because as a young person I was introduced to science in a very serious way, but also to faith and religion in a very serious way. And so I sort of absorbed both of them pretty young.
Well, it's a fascinating background that you had kind of both of them from an early age, the science and the faith, but it seems like in terms of your education, science led the way. So you get a PhD from Duke in experimental nuclear physics. I'm not sure what that is, but it sounds really complicated. So you do that, then you become a professor at Berry College, you're teaching astronomy, you're teaching physics, until 2008. Tell us what happens at that point and how you got to that decision.
Well, a few things happened. One is that when I was a sophomore in college, I decided to become a professor.
Okay.
Because I had professors who were so good and so influential in my life, I thought, they're kind of goofy and they have a real job at the same time, so that's what I want to do. I want to do that. And so I set off to do it. And by the time I was in my mid-30s, I had achieved tenure at the kind of institution I wanted to be at, and then I realized I had 30 years of my working life yet to go, and I'd achieved everything that I had ever, I just got to a point where I was like, what's next? And I looked forward, and every college campus has senior faculty who, there's really two kinds. The ones who turned off 2 decades earlier and are just coasting with tenure, and those for whom tenure was like this gateway into creativity and all new ways of doing things. And I felt myself pretty quickly contracting and becoming the former. That happened, but at the same time, I had since probably the late 90s sensed that maybe I had a calling into some kind of ministry, but I didn't know what that looked like.
Sure.
So at that point, stars kind of lined up for me and the family because the family was ready for it too.
Okay.
And so I was able to make the move.
Yeah, and so at that point, you enroll in seminary. You go to Emory's Candler School of Theology. You do a 3-year master's degree. It had to have been, it seems to me, having taught at Candler a little bit, that you don't get a lot of people enroll in seminary with already a PhD, let alone a PhD in science.
No,
what was that like for you?
It was interesting. It was a whole new way of thinking.
Yeah.
I knew how to read and stuff, and I could put a sentence together, but engaging in texts at that level and writing about them, it almost hurt. It was like for a year I felt like I was behind because I just didn't know how to do it. But it was definitely, I feel like, a gift to sit after being a teacher for 14, 15 years, sitting and becoming a student again. It was really an incredible experience.
And I find that when you get this chance to be a teacher, or excuse me, to be a student after you've taught, it's a different experience.
It's totally different.
You listen with different ears.
Oh, yes, yes. And you also can be more critical of the professors than you would have been. Because you can see sort of what they're doing, and you're like, oh, no.
Yeah,
no, but actually, I was really lucky at Candler. I had some of the greatest professors. I mean, truly just got me going and just woke up my mind in ways that, I had never been woken up because I hadn't been taught.
And that's an amazing thing, again,
before.
for someone with a PhD in experimental nuclear physics to say they had some educational experience that opens up new doors.
I mean, science, it's got a lot of status, It brought us, better can openers and taller basketball players and people walking on the moon. So it's got a lot of status, but it's its own discipline with its
Sure.
own,
Yeah.
things you don't do.
Right.
And
Right.
skills you don't need. And so it's
Yeah.
oftentimes, I think, put up on a pedestal maybe that it might not quite
Sure.
deserve.
Yeah, that makes sense. So just one more question about Candler. I'm wondering, was there a particular class or experience at Candler, kind of now from the side of faith and theology or biblical engagement, that really was influential or transformative
Two
for you?
things. One is I came in thinking, oh, I'm a New Testament guy. But then I took a year of Old Testament from David Peterson and Brent Strawn. Like, boom! It was just, and ever since, whenever I think of Scripture, I almost always go to the Old Testament first when I'm looking for something. So there was that, but I also discovered a love for historical theology, particularly medieval theology. I had no clue that would have happened. The mystics of the medieval period, and Aquinas. I love the systematics, the nature of it.
Sure.
How Aquinas say was so structured, or like physics, it was very structured and so forth. And I really had a deep affection for that completely surprised me.
I wonder if that has anything to do with your science training. I mean, not to stretch it too far, but I've always thought of systematic theology as kind of working through and trying to delineate categories of things. And that's a lot of what scientists do, it seems like, in discovery and experimentation, is to classify and categorize phenomena.
And at first, I was very drawn to systematic theology, and I really loved my course. Ian McFarland was one of the... I've never met a professor who cares so much and teaches with so much just discipline and commitment as Ian McFarland. But he taught me systematic theology, and I loved it. But ultimately, I think it leaves me a bit cold. I think systematic theology does, because I see that kind of thinking works for physics. I'm not quite as convinced that it works for theology.
Sure.
So
I'm of the same mindset, having a background in Old Testament, that I think that when we engage the biblical materials, they actually make it harder to systematize. Maybe perhaps precisely because God can't be systematized in the way that we always want to make things neat and tidy about what is God like, how should we think about God. I think the biblical witness reminds us that there are diverse ways of understanding and seeing and expressing theology, and that's, I think it unsettles us in the best possible faith way.
The thing about faith and theology is that, well, I guess faith, and the thing that I went to seminary for was a whole life. I wanted something that would be about all of my life and not just about what I thought, And physics was really good for just what I could think, but it left me feeling a little bit unbalanced.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Well, let me ask you a question or two about your talk in particular.
Okay.
You begin your talk by mentioning a long quote by Neil deGrasse Tyson, a brilliant scientist. And the gist of the quote is that when he looks out into the cosmos, it seems harder and harder, or he's less and less convinced that there's something benevolent out there. And yet when you look out at the cosmos, you are more and more convinced that there's something holy out there. And what strikes me is you're both scientists. You both use the same instruments. You, by and large, look at the same data and the same phenomena. Why is it that what you see seems so different than what Neil deGrasse Tyson sees?
I don't know. It might have been my upbringing, the way I was brought up. And I feel like I connected to God pretty quickly as a young person. I never really had a doubt, but what I don't talk about in my talk is that I actually went through a period of severe doubting. And I did opt for science first. You said earlier that I had come up with faith and science both, but I opted for science. That's not an accident. Around my college years, I was like, I got these two things, and science seems to be like the one that is more convincing to me.
Sure.
But I do think that if you dig deep enough into the faith and don't just throw it out too early, that there's riches there for you that help when you... I think one of the issues is that if you really want sort of a manageable answer to the religion science question, you're not going to be able to reconcile them. Because it's not, don't think you can systematically do it. Getting back to systematics.
Sure.
I don't think you can do it in a nice, clean, sort of manageable way. But if you recognize the fundamental mystery of life and honor that mystery and don't try to paper over it or explain it away, then I think it becomes easier.
And it seems like one of the things you're saying is that this idea of mystery and maybe even beauty is something that faith and science share together. Or they
Yes.
both are ways of
Yes.
discovering mystery and beauty. But it struck me, though, as I heard you talk so much about mystery and beauty, I thought, these are not words that scientists often use, or at
No.
least not in their published reports.
No, but it's what got them into science in the first place.
Interesting.
It's
Interesting.
the common cradle of both faith and science.
Yeah.
It's a sense of, oh my God, what is this? What am I
Yeah.
doing here? Why are we here?
Yeah.
But in grown-up, official science work, no, you don't talk about wonder and beauty.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But that's what every scientist
Yeah.
I've ever known has some story from their childhood about how a camping trip or a visit to the ocean or a sight of the night, something is just got them in.
Yeah.
And but in official science work, you don't bring that in.
So how
It's
do you,
not good form.
Right, that's right, that's right. Yeah, it seems like so science and faith share that interest in mystery and beauty, or that starting point, but it seems like we give permission in faith context to talk about mystery and beauty, maybe more so than happens in
'Cause
science.
I think that's because I think religious faith is about everything.
Yeah.
But science has a narrower focus and a narrower interest, and some things fall outside of it. But faith covers, if you look at the Bible, right, it starts at the beginning of time and ends at the end of it's about everything. It's cosmic in scope.
Yeah.
So it's comprehensive, and so I think that's why in faith context you're free to say things like that, because it's about everything.
Sure.
But science excludes some things.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So how is it, I'm thinking of you now as a professor and a teacher at Agnes Scott College, you've got bright students in your classroom. When you're teaching physics or astronomy or whatever it is, how do you get them to appreciate that beauty and wonder and mystery side of science?
That's a good question, because one thing I try to do is relate a certain topic, something sort of small and boring like, magnets. They're actually mind-blowingly fascinating, but at the level that I introduce it to my pre-med majors, they're kind of, but I say, the sun's got a magnetic field, and every 11 years it flips polarity, and we don't know why. They're like, what? Why is that? I don't know. Maybe you could go be a physicist and figure it out. But then they want to know about, Jupiter's magnetic field and so forth. I try to relate it to something that is, in a sense, wonderful.
Sure.
And it just strikes this sort of, makes them ask questions. I'm not always successful.
I'm sure a lot of professors share that experience. Let me ask you another question. It's related to faith and science, but it's a different angle on it. So it seems to me that faith and science is a potentially divisive conversation. Some people see it as irreconcilably different. That is, you either think in terms of faith or science. Other folks go to a different extreme and think that faith and science are easy to reconcile, or at least it's very possible to reconcile them. I think of creationists, for instance, folks who believe that the world was created in 6 literal days, I don't know, some 6, 7, 8,000 years ago. And I would say, that's not my own view, but I would say that those folks think they're doing faith and science, but insofar as they're trying to use science to prove a particular literal interpretation of Scripture.
Right.
That's not what you're doing, but I'm wondering, how would you respond to a creationist who's kind of using faith and science in that way?
Well, the first thing I'll say about that is that when I speak to a creationist, I think of it foremost as a pastoral response that I give, and not an intellectual response, because you cannot argue with a well-armed creationist. You simply cannot. It comes as that sort of mindset that you can't argue. It comes with the territory of being that kind of creationist, I think. And they do use science, but they use it, I would say, I'm more cynical, I would say that they use the language of science. They make it sound science-y, so that if you're not a specialist, you can read what they write and go, oh, this is science, because it's got these words and these concepts, and I can see those words in other real science, publications.
Sure.
But it's just dressed up, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
It's not, they're not being truly scientific.
Sure. Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, I think I understand the impulse of where they want to come from, where they're coming from, but the results don't always seem all that satisfying. And in terms of the faith-science dialogue, it doesn't seem to move the needle in a
No,
in a
it doesn't.
productive way.
It doesn't. It's just entrenchment.
Yeah.
But
Well,
it really is more of a pastoral question.
That's
I
right.
think what is this
Yeah.
person? What I actually think, and this might sound like I'm being paternalistic. Maybe I am, but I think what is this person? What's
Yeah,
going on with this
yeah,
person
yeah.
in front of me,
Yeah.
rather than what are these arguments? Because I can't engage with those
Sure.
arguments. Not really. I can, but
Sure.
it just grinds the metal
Yeah.
and doesn't go anywhere.
Well, I have to say, I see the same in when I teach biblical studies courses. Oftentimes, when people have a difficult issue with Scripture to deal with, I mean, there are plenty of difficult issues in Scripture to deal with. There's no shortage of that. But oftentimes, I find that the difficult presenting problem, whether it's faith and science or something else, it's usually a symptom of
Yes.
some other pain, some other suffering,
That's
some
what I
other
mean.
disappointment.
That's what I mean. I don't want to.
Yeah.
Then I don't want to say, oh, you're not really concerned about the things you think you're concerned
Sure,
about.
sure, that's
You have
right.
a deeper
That's
pain,
right.
and that I don't want to
Yeah.
come across like that. But
Yeah, yeah.
I think it is in fact true.
Sure, and to get to that other issue, maybe that's the pastoral moment.
Right. Right.
Well, speaking of pain and suffering, one of the biblical books that you seem drawn to, both in your talk and in your book, The Stars Beneath Us, is the book of Job.
Right.
Now, Job is a complex book. It doesn't always get a lot of airtime in Christian circles,
No.
but for you,
I think once in the 3-year
cycle,
the
lectionary
lectionary cycle, I think it
it's
shows
not
up.
often, but yet for you, it seems like a centerpiece, at least in your own engagement of mystery and wonder.
It is.
in
It is
God.
actually, in my own thinking, it's a centerpiece.
Yeah. Well, why is that? What is it about Job's story or that narrative that resonates
Well,
with
one,
you?
it's universal. It appeals to all people on some level, right? Everybody suffers, and frankly, suffering is arbitrary, right? You never know. You never know why. So that universal appeal. I mean, you're an Old Testament guy. It doesn't just show up in the Hebrew. In Hebrew Bible, it shows up in other
Sure.
places too. So that's one appeal of it, is that it's universal. But another one is that it deals with creation in such a way. It's God's response to Job, which is the longest divine speech in the whole Bible, is focused on creation. And I think that's a fascinating way to respond to a very human and very legitimate question of justice.
Sure.
Is to respond to that fundamental human ideal with this vision of creation.
Yeah.
And there's so much in there I couldn't possibly unpack it in this time. And it also, I like it because it shows creation as, I think, more in the sense that modern science sees it.
Sure.
You know, it's alien sometimes and weird and a little bit threatening, you know, and not to do with us.
Yeah.
Nothing. It's impersonal in a sense, but I wish I could give you a nice, 2-minute concise answer to that question. But there's I could probably list 2 or 3 other things about it that really appeal to me.
But I think that's precisely the point, is that the picture of creation that Job gives us, it brings us into that world of mystery. We don't have these nice ordered days, as in Genesis 1.
Right.
We don't have it culminating in the creation of humanity on day 6.
In fact, it's almost a decreation story.
That's right.
The path it takes
Yeah.
is towards, you know, it ends up with Leviathan at the bottom of the ocean, bottom of the sea.
And so maybe that works us out of our propensity to want to order, to want to figure things out, to want to keep everything in a box, God and science alike, and it opens up a space of beauty and wonder.
And ignorance.
That's right.
You know, it's like, and God does sort of come across as a bully, and it can easily be read that way. But I think that when you come face to face with their ignorance, it's not an easy feeling. It's not a good feeling. And I feel like Job was just seeing all these gaps, all these things that he thought he understood, that he just doesn't.
Yeah.
And that appeals to me as well.
Yeah. Well, Paul, thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
this time. It's great having this conversation with you.
It's a
We're so
pleasure.
glad you're
It's a
part of
pleasure.
TheoEd Talks.
Me too. Thank you.